Hello, it is Carmen here with Mako, and today we're going to review our glaze profile for Mako Stoneware Crystal Glaze Midnight Rain. Midnight Rain is a vibrant blue glaze with a glossy finish. This glaze will break a bright green over texture. The crystals in the glaze are brown, and when they melt in the kiln, they can produce mobility and bring a brown and green variation into the glaze. So first we'll just check out our label here. This is always full of great information for our customers. So here we have our sample tile, which was fired to cone 6 on a white stoneware clay body. Here we note our firing range is from cone 5 to 10, but as you'll see when we review these tiles, there can be variation within that range. So we always do recommend to test before you put it on finished pieces or do a production order or anything like that. On the side here, we have our ACMI seal, the dinnerware safe notation, and then importantly, the lot number. You'll want to report this to technical if you do have any issues with any of our products. The dinnerware safe information, if you don't have one of these updated labels, can also be found on our website. So please check that out as well. We have basic results, applications, suggestions, and tips. In the suggestions and tips on our stoneware glazes, we do note the base glaze of all of our crystal glazes. So for Midnight Rain, the base glaze is blue surf. So if you're at the bottom of the pint and you have a lot of crystals and you want to extend that a little bit further, mixing some blue surf in there can help further the use of this product. So starting out, I'm going to go ahead and showcase some application, and then we'll go ahead and review our test tiles. So with our crystal glazes, we recommend to spoon them out onto a plate for easy access of crystals. This is definitely the most beneficial for glazes that have big, heavy crystals that sink to the bottom when mixing the jar or shaking it isn't quite enough. Sometimes they sink to the bottom really fast still. Midnight Rain is not a glaze that really has any issue with crystal dispersion, but for consistency's sake, we are going to go ahead and put it on a plate. So I've got my tile here. I'm going to go ahead and glaze it just like I've done these tiles here. I've got 1, 2, and 3 coats on the front, and then a total of 3 coats on the entire back here. So I'm gonna use my this is the SW-115 number 4 soft fan, and we recommend these soft bristled fan brushes for glaze application. It can be really, really helpful. We do make a larger version if you tend to be light-handed or are glazing a larger piece. So I really like to make sure my brush is fully saturated. That's the benefit of these nice soft bristles on here. They really plump up with the glaze. I'm going to start spreading it on the surface here. And as soon as I feel my brush dragging or it's making a sound, I'm going to go ahead and put more glaze on my brush to make sure I'm getting a good, thorough application. Midnight Rain's not a color that we really have a lot of issues with going on too thin. It brings a lot of punch, even if it is a little bit thinner of an application. But if you want some of that juicy mobility and melting that happens, you'll want to make sure to put on some heavier coats. So there's 1 coat. You can see it's taking a second to dry, not too long, but we still do have some wet spots on it. So if it's drying immediately, you might want to be putting it on a little bit thicker. So to start, we're going to check out our cone 6 tile, because this is how we display Midnight Rain in all of our marketing material. So here we've got 1, 2, and 3 coats. You can see that this glaze is a bit mobile when you're using it at 3 coats. So you might want to be a little bit careful if you're glazing an entire piece with it, especially if it doesn't have texture or anything to catch at the bottom. You may want to reseed your coats in those instances. And you can see here, 1 coat, you're getting a lot of the green, and you can see those crystals pretty well in there. 2 coats, you can see the crystals, but it's still blue. We're breaking green over texture. And then 3 coats, we're still breaking green over texture, and the crystals kind of get lost in the glaze with that mobility. And so here we've got 3 coats on the back. This glaze is beautiful. It's got a nice glossy finish, and these crystals bring some nice color variation. So we've got cone 6 here, and we're going to compare that to cone 5. So cone 5, it looks like basically you can tell there's less heat work. So the finish is still really, really nice, but you have a little bit more definition with those crystals because they're not quite melting as much. So you can see kind of how this is a little bit more developed than this, but the performance is a bit similar. You see the crystal definition in your green, a little bit less definition than here, and you're getting the striations. And then here you have a lot of striations with 3 coats, but since it didn't get a little bit hotter, it's not all melting together like it is on the cone 6 sample. So here's a great side by side here as well. So we got cone 5 and cone 6, 3 coats. All right, so we can go ahead and add another coat onto our tile here. So this, like I said, will be glazed just like these tiles. Scooping up that glaze. And this will be my 1, 2, and 3 coats. And on the back here, we're just doing 3 coats on the whole thing. So I'll load my brush up a little bit more. All right, so this will take a bit longer to dry since we've got the piece saturated already. So I'm gonna set this to the side while I discuss our other firing results. So next here, we'll check out our cone 10 reduction. So since this glaze is pretty mobile, I recommended reseeding coats on the cone 10. So here you can see I've only got 1 coat, and we did have a little bit of buildup here. It didn't run quite as much as I thought, but definitely good to be prepared. So this compares to the cone 6. So you can see that reduction kind of darkens the glaze a bit, and it kind of creates a nice contrast with some of the green and blue that you have there. And then here we're showcasing the Midnight Rain with Flux. So here we've got light flux and here we've got dark flux. There's a slight variation between these 2 colors, but they really brighten up the glaze, whether it's light or dark. But these are 2 different products here. So light flux and dark flux. 2 coats are applied underneath Midnight Rain here. And then on the back here, we've got 2 coats applied on top of Midnight Rain. So both produced a lot of mobility. I stopped my glaze all the way up here because I know Midnight Rain's mobile, and the Flux adds mobility, so I knew it was gonna run a lot. The back seemed to run more than the front, so applying the Flux on top seemed to run more, but you kind of get more of these striations that are happening here. So we do have the mobility of all of our stoneware glazes listed in our comprehensive stoneware guide. This can be found under the resources link on our website. It's really, really helpful for if you're new to a glaze and you want to know if you need to be careful applying it, if you can be generous with all 3 coats. That's a really helpful resource while you're learning how our glazes fit into your personal studio practice. And then here we're going to showcase the cone 10. So we've got cone 10, Flux over Midnight Rain, and here's cone 6, Flux over Midnight Rain. So that really darkens it up, and it kind of gets a little bit muddy with the results here. I do like these, the color variation that happens on the edge there. It's kind of cool how it highlights it there, but we've got light flux and dark flux here. next we'll review how this performs on different clay bodies. So Midnight Rain isn't too finicky here, so we've got it on a dark brown clay. So all of these were fired at cone 6 with a 10-minute hold. And we do 10-minute holds on the alternative firing bodies because it really helps prevent surface issues. A lot of the time, the different raw materials in these clays can cause outgassing, which causes pinholes. And a lot of the time, adding a 10-minute hold at the top of your kiln can really help alleviate any surface issues here. So hopefully you can see the color variation that happens here. It's kind of subtle because the clay body is really dark, but it's really cool. And then here we've got it on a speckled brown. Again, a 10-minute hold really alleviated surface issues that could have caused more problems here. But the color is not really affected too much by these other clays here. It's a really strongly pigmented glaze. So here we've got a white speckled. You can't really see the speckles through. A lot of the time these speckles will kind of mimic what these crystals look like anyway. So this is one glaze that you can't really see the speckles through too well, which is really surprising. Usually you can see them really well. All right, so we'll go ahead and go over our combinations, and then we'll apply one more coat to our tile, and that's all that I will have for you today. Here, so Midnight Rain, because it's so highly pigmented, there's not a lot of variation that happens with the different glaze combinations that we're showcasing here. We'll have our typical stoneware featured combo glaze on our website, but don't be surprised that there's not a lot of color variation. These are all going to be some sort of blue and green and brown, basically. So, but they all do have really subtle different nuances, so definitely check them out and see if there's any one that calls to you. So these are ones I tried to pick that had some variety, and even with that, it's still not too different. Here we're showcasing Night Moth over Midnight Rain. So when we do our combinations, we apply 2 coats of each glaze. The Midnight Rain, we cut off a little bit sooner than we usually do. Typically we'll go down to the texture here with our second coat, but or our Night Moth is what we reseeded. Our layer, first we put on 2 coats of Midnight Rain to the bottom, and second we put Night Moth down here because we anticipated that mobility that was going to happen in combination. So Midnight Rain really does like to move with heavy application, and especially when it's used in combination. So be aware, test out your glazes, see what you're layering together. It'll really help you. And then here we have Cordovan over Midnight Rain. So this created some really cool modeling that happened with the blue and the brown and the dark from the Cordovan. But you can see here, these coats being reseeded. Again, the Cordovan, you know, we left a lot of space and we still got a little bit of pooling around the edge here. And here we have Frosted Lemon over Midnight Rain. So the Frosted Lemon really brightened up that Midnight Rain here. But, you know, as all the other combos, we still have blue, brown, and green, and mobility. So again, keeping that second glaze up a little bit higher, anticipating that mobility, and we still ended up getting some runoff. So when we're firing these and we're not sure how they're gonna turn out, a lot of the time we will put it on a kiln brick. It's really helpful. It comes off a little bit easier than a cookie, but whatever you have access to is great. Just anything to save those kiln shelves. We also manufacture a really nice kiln wash. So if you do end up having an oops and it sticks to the kiln shelf, our Mako kiln wash is really good for not letting your piece stick. So it'll pop right off of the kiln there. All right, so here we're gonna do our third coat. We're going a little bit easier because it's less, so there's the third one. And so this third coat, I'm gonna stop a little bit early because like I said, Midnight Rain can produce a decent amount of mobility. So I'm gonna account for that mobility by taking that third coat a little bit higher than I took the other 2 coats. So this is an example of reseeding your coats. You could reseed all of your coats or just the last one. I kind of like having the 2 coats down here because then you don't end up where it looks really obvious that you've reseeded the coats. A lot of the time this will flow down and kind of make up for that space. So I think that is all that I have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I hope you feel more educated about our stoneware crystal glaze Midnight Rain. As always, please drop questions in the comments. We love hearing what your inquiring minds are thinking. So thanks so much again, and as always, make it Mako.